Hello everyone, I am Vivek Grewal and I lead the technical consulting team at Well Labs. Today I am going to talk about an evaluation that we did uh, recently at Well Labs. Uh, it's on MGNREGA planning. MGNREGA has been one of the largest public spending programs on natural resources management in India. And for the past few years, Foundation for Ecological Security and Aragyam have been building digital tools and conducting capacity building of frontline functionaries to improve the MGNREGA planning and site selection of the water conservation resources. And with collaboration from Environmental Defense Fund, we conducted this evaluation in 24 panchayats of Karnataka. And I'm going to walk you through the broad contours and the learnings and how they can be taken forward. So before I dive precisely into the subject, I wanted to briefly mention where it is situated in the context. On the one hand, we have a lot of problems coming up in terms of overexploitation and climate change. On the other, the finance to solve these problems is also increasing, whether it is from government, from CSR agencies, or from international climate finance. Where Well Labs sees its role essentially is to find out what works and what does not work. For example, there are issues with site selection. Siltation is a big problem. There is a lack of outcome focus in many interventions that we do. And this evaluation of MGNREGA is also situated in this third bracket where we are essentially trying to see what works and what does not, and how we can improve the funding and the planning and execution of the biggest natural resource management program in the country. So essentially, this is the evaluation of Jala Sanjeevini. Jala Sanjeevini is a reimagination of MGNREGA in Karnataka. MGNREGA, of course, is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, where the first objective of the act is to provide a minimum number of uh, uh, work in rural areas. But the additional side of it is that it focuses on improving the natural resource management of the community in partnership with the community, making them the leaders and the owners of those of their areas. And what the government of Karnataka around 2020 was experiencing was that there were a continuous bout of extreme events in the sense of repeated years of droughts and declining water levels, and that stress could be felt by the government. And in response to that, they tried to revamp MGNREGA through better planning and with the focus on improving the geospatial and remote sensing aspect. So essentially, Jal Sanjeevani is a reimagined version of MGNREGA in Karnataka. And as the slide says, the objectives are to improve groundwater levels, reclaiming and rejuvenating the commons like water bodies and including land, and overall to reduce land degradation and increase the green cover in villages. And the way the government of Karnataka and FES envisioned the problems with MGNREGA planning are twofold. On the one hand, you would see the top uh, flow of elements, where the root cause for the first one is that they found that there was insufficient scientific and technical capacity of MGNREGA functionaries, which often led to suboptimal site selection for structures, leading to unproductive assets and degradation. And on the other hand, there was inadequate community engagement in NRM planning and a failure to capture the demand of what they want, leading to lack of ownership by the community for these assets, and again that contributing to the bad management of natural resource management. So, of course, there can be many things that can be an issue with MGNREGA planning, but this is the clear way in which the government of Karnataka kind of planned to solve these two independent threads through this program. Foundation for Ecological Security, with support from Argyam, essentially was part of this technical support program for the government of Karnataka. And they had these digital tools, they provided capacity building, which I'll talk about. But essentially, this was a program that was built for scale. Before 2020, similar efforts for better site selection and capacity building were done at smaller, a few panchayats scale, but FES and Argyam tried to expand it in a low touch manner, that can we have these tools and strategic capacity building at district and block levels to ensure that this program can be improved at scale, which is a whole different level compared to a pilot that they had already done. So these are the components for the technical support program. On the top left, you would see the digital tools that were the soul of the program. First, and the most important one essentially, was CLART. It's a short for Composite Land Assessment and Restoration Tool. It is essentially a decision aiding tool for site selection of water conservation structures. It basically gives you, it colors the local area or watershed into areas of good recharge and bad recharge. The good recharge ones are in green and the bad recharge ones are in red. And essentially, the MGNREGA planning functionary on the ground, let's say the Rozgar Sevak or any other variation in that locality, they can essentially use this tool to better site the structures. And additionally, it has further elements which I'll come talk about in the coming slides. The second major tool was what they called participatory digital attestation. Essentially, this what we are calling a PDA tool. Essentially, it was used to track trainings, provide resources for trainings, modules, and basically a platform for capacity building for the functionaries. And the third one was water level monitoring tool, where people could literally just physically measure their water levels and put it into this software. And then the second element overall for the program was focusing on data for governance. So both the PDA tool and the CLART tool have dashboards attached to it, which essentially focus on generating data at source so that the accessibility and visibility of information improves. MGNREGA's dashboard is very strong for the execution part. Once the structures are selected and put into the shelf of works, their implementation side, what is taken up, how many people worked, how much money to transfer, all of that is very well done on the MGNREGA MIS. But the planning side, before something goes on the shelf of works, what is it that people demanded? How was the process to choose it? How was the site selection done? This was a major kind of a blind spot in MGNREGA digital governance, and part of the program essentially tried to solve that for that. The third component, like I said, was capacity building itself, about natural resource management and about how to use these tools essentially. And fourth, like I said, being designed for scale. And one of the main components here was essentially Foundation for Ecological Security kept district coordinators and a few district functionaries for these 8 districts where this was implemented in Karnataka. And through this, this strategically placed number of people or resource persons, they were able to. The idea was to impart that capacity building for these tools, so this combination of tools and capacity building could work at scale. So that's those are the broad components of the program. And this is the theory of change, which is complementary to the problems that we saw, the 2 flowcharts of problems in MGNREGA. So if you see on the left, essentially the trainings focused on use of digital tools and how to increase community engagement. On the top, then uh, it focused on improving the knowledge, skills, and practices, and then increasing the adoption of tools and improving the locations, annual action plans, and then a shift in planning for the better data visibility and improved groundwater levels, right? And these H1, H3, H5, H6 are the hypotheses that we have made as a part of this assessment methodology, that whether the arrow from here to here is functional on the ground or not. That is what we checked through different data, primary and secondary, that we collected. And through these hypotheses is what we will be able to see up to what degree was the program successful, let's say going from left to right as a theory of change. And on the bottom, the theory of change focuses on the community side of it, that they tried to increase community engagement, and in two specific ways. One on the demands for annual action plan, and secondly in the formation of GPAS, which is Gram Parisar Abruhut Samiti, which is basically a samiti, a local Gram Panchayat committee, which is responsible for better natural resource management and commons management, particularly like commons land and commons, water structures. Essentially, the government of Karnataka has added this additional Gram Panchayat committee to act as a linchpin for natural resource management. And the idea is that whether these activities will be able to lead to better governance of commons and better water levels. So this is the broad theory of change for the program. So an overview of what we found is on this slide. I'll go briefly into each of these, but the idea is not to make this video too long. So that's why I put this overview at the start, so that you have a sense about what worked and what did not. And subsequently, we'll go into each of these 8 hypotheses one by one briefly, and then focus on the recommendations. Okay, so these are the 8 hypotheses which we saw in the previous theory of change. The ticks or dashes or crosses that we see here are basically wherever there is a tick, that hypothesis or sub-hypothesis worked well. For a dash, there was either not enough signal on the ground or not enough data that was available for us to see. And then the cross is where there was clear data that this has not worked well. So what you would see is there are 3 sub-hypotheses which worked well, 4 where it is inconclusive, and 1 where it was negative. And a simple way to think through it is that the shallower components of theory of change, by that I mean the things towards the left side, worked well, but things towards the more right side there was not enough signal that they improved. So for example, we found that the skills, mindset, and knowledge of MGNREGA functionaries in the Gram Panchayats improved. The community engagement, though, did not improve drastically. That is the second hypothesis. And then, given that there was improved skills, knowledge, and mindset, what we found the signal in better adoption of CLART tool also. So clearly, wherever this intervention was there, the CLART tool was much better used for site suitability of MGNREGA structures. The annual action plan formats did not quite improve, but there was a clear shift in planning towards better water conservation work in the treatment districts. And then going ahead, the digitization leading to better processes becoming easier, faster, efficient, that was again unclear. And then going ahead, the governance of commons through GPAS was negative because the presence of GPAS was kind of they were non-existent essentially in most places, and there was no clear signal on the groundwater level. So, in a nutshell, the skills improved, the adoption of tools improved, and to an extent, the planning of conservation, water conservation works also improved, but their translation to groundwater level did not work as well. So that this I talked about this the hypothesis on the top. So let's say this chunk towards the top left worked relatively well, and the one towards the bottom did not work as well, and we were not able to reach the final thing. But there were clear signals of improved planning in water conservation work, which is also a good improvement. Okay, so I'll quickly run through some of these hypotheses, giving you a gist of what we found. But before that, just a note on the methodology and how we use this method of hypothesis testing to find out the results of the assessment. This is a note on our sampling. Essentially, this project for capacity building and digital tools was implemented in 8 districts of Karnataka, mostly the drier regions. So if you see this eastern and northern part of Karnataka, this is the most uh, semi-arid area with hard rock aquifers, which faces a lot of water stress, which is why the program was kind of planned in this area. So in terms of sampling, there are 2 steps. First, we chose 4 out of these 8 districts where which were adequately representative of the 8. And in the second step, uh, we essentially chose control pairs for these 4 intervention districts based on 2 things. One is the proximity. So a district, or subsequently, we did the same process at the block and the Gram Panchayat level. So a district, and then choice of the block and the GP there. And then for the control, 2 criteria. First is proximity to the treatment district, because proximity has great correlation for similar biophysical or socioeconomic characteristics. And secondly, we use these 5 characteristics to choose interventions, so to choose control gram panchayats which were similar to the chosen treatment panchayats, right? So trying to be representative, and the control trying to be similar to the treatment. These were the types of data we collected. First, of course, from MGNREGA dashboard. Second bit of secondary data was from CLART dashboard, the public digital attestation dashboard, Ward Sabha and Gram Sabha resolutions, annual action plans, and interviews with MGNREGA official. We visited these 24 Gram Panchayats and did more than 80 interviews with Gram Panchayat officials to comprehensively understand the processes on the ground in treatment in control district, and trying to find that differential whether in the treatment districts the program performed well or not. Now, coming to the key findings, these are the first 2 hypotheses. On the left, it is about knowledge improvement. So what we did was we had a questionnaire for the planning functionary, who basically at the Gram Panchayat level, the Gram Kayak Mitra, who kind of leads the technical, who leads the MGNREGA planning. We had this questionnaire for them, and we rated them on their understanding of the Jala Sanjeevini concepts and the natural resources management understanding, and secondly on the knowledge about the tool. And the green bars here are for treatment and blue are for control, and you can see that clearly the green is better than the blue. So the treatment functionaries knew their natural resource management and their tools better than the counterparts. Of course, I think I forgot to mention that the use of CLART is mandated across the state, but this capacity building program was conducted only in these 8 districts. So people are supposed to use it in the use CLART in the blue areas also, but apparently they know more about the tool and general watershed management practices in the treatment area. Then on the right, you would see the differential on community engagement. We went through the data on public participation and inclusion of marginalized groups, and talk to people in the community and in the planning hierarchy, and came up with a scoring criterion. And but essentially we found that there was no significant difference, as you would see here, between the treatment and control. If at all, treatment was slightly worse. But I would say this is a difficult thing to measure, and there was not enough signal to kind of capture the processes, or there was not enough signal, I would say, in the differences between the two groups. And this is a snapshot of the data on community engagement for the given panchayats. One limitation was that although the government says that they have a portal where they which is called Panchatantra portal for the government of Karnataka, where they're supposed to have a lot of data on participation in Ward Sabhas and Gram Sabhas, and participatory rural appraisal exercises, but there was not enough data. That was a major limitation and is one of the recommendations for this process. And you would see the participation as a percentage of job card holders was often below or around 5%. Total numbers are not that bad. Across different ward sabhas, they could go over 200, which is quite decent across different ward sabhas, separate meetings. But still, overall, one can say that there is not overwhelming participation. But more than that, we don't have enough data about participation. That's a limitation. Okay, then moving on to the further hypothesis about, so now we know that the knowledge of the functionaries was good. Let's see whether that translated into better CLART tool adoption. So these top two rectangles are corresponding to each other. And on the left, you would see the CLART tools. Actually, let me go to the next slide and explain the 4 different indicators we used for CLART adoption. First is the total number of forms submitted on CLART. So when a functionary goes on the ground and they look at the CLART colors, that if this is green, we could the tool which brings together all these different scientific layers on geology, soil, etc., to see whether it's a good recharge structure or not. And then they propose on the app that yes, we want to build a structure here. Essentially, they submit a form that this was what it would be like, and the CLART tool essentially also gives them a broad estimation of what it would take in terms of number of person days, etc., and the sizing and the design for the structure. So we looked at these forms submitted on CLART. Remember, people are supposed to do it across the state, but only in a subset, like 8 district, there is this additional plan capacity building, and we can see the difference between the 2 types of districts, treatment and control, for number of forms submitted in CLART. The next one the next indicator is approval of mandatory structures in natural in on CLART. The once a functionary has put their data on CLART, their supervisor at the block level is supposed to approve whether the approved structure makes sense to them or not, because they were the people who kind of trained them in the past. So we checked what is the approval percentage that is done at this multi-hierarchy level. Third, the number of forms pending for approval. And fourth, percentage of approved structure in compliance with CLART. So if CLART says that this is the type of structure, like let's say a recharge structure that should be built in the green area of CLART, versus this is the type of structure which should be built as a storage structure for, let's say, a farm pond in the red area of CLART, which is supposed to have lesser recharge, right? So red has lesser recharge, so it can store more, and green has more recharge, so it can be a recharge structure. So we checked the compliance of that type of structure to CLART recommendations, whether the green area has recharge structures or not, and whether the red area has storage structures or not. So these are the 4 types of adoption that we checked. On the top left, you would see the number of forms submitted. And you can clearly see that the greens, which are these treatment pairs, they are much higher than their control district counterparts. The blue ones, sorry. So green is higher than the blue for all of them. So clearly the usage of CLART and adoption of CLART is much better in the treatment districts. On the bottom right, you would see conformity with CLART recommendation. Like I said, whether the recharge area has a recharge structure or not. And this conformity was around 75% for treatment gram panchayats and around 50 to 55% in the control gram panchayats. And so again, we see that the usage of CLART is better. The knowledge about CLART is translating into better usage on the numbers that we have on the dashboard and asking to people how they are using it. So I talked about the top and the last one. In these two also, they're similar in terms of the approval. I won't go into the details, but here also the approval in the treatment districts is much better than the treatment district. So the use of CLART, the way it's supposed to be, is better in the treatment districts. Now moving on, the next way we saw, we tried to understand the NRM planning here is to sit with functionaries and understand what they did over the course of these 3-4 months that they plan for MGNREGA. So, and we created this journey map for how they, for the different processes they do from October of any year to February of any year for MGNREGA planning in the subsequent year, right? And I know this is quite a lot, so I'll just focus on the bottom part of the presentation. The top part corresponds to, in the blue, that corresponds to the detailed project report formation, which is once in 3 years. And the bottom one is the annual action plan preparation. So for simplicity, let me just focus on the bottom one. You see 2 types of arrows here. One is in orange. It is the hypothesized journey, that this is how they were intending to do things one after the other. And when we talked to people about what they did, when they did in these different gram panchayats, we found that the actual journey was mostly similar, but it deviated in certain critical times, especially in this section we are calling shortlisting of works and annual action preparation. So I won't go again into the details, but maybe you can pause and look through the whole timeline. But I would focus on, okay, let me just quickly walk you through the process. Essentially, the most important initial process is to collect demand for works from the Gram Sabhas. So the functionary holds different ward sabhas. There can be multiple wards in a panchayat, and they take in demands for works that we want this pond to be constructed here, or we want this cattle shed to be made in our home. So those are the kinds of demands they get. And then the first point of difference that you would see here is that the orange one, after collecting those demands in from the Gram Sabhas, focuses on field visits by functionaries checking whether that site is good for construction of that structure or not, and then doing ground truthing using CLART, approving it on the dashboard, preparing an initial labor budget and annual action plan, and then approving them through the Gram Sabha. This orange one, this is how it's supposed to be. But what we found in some Gram Panchayats, what the way it was happening is that people start with the ward sabhas, then they straight up go into the Gram Sabha, where the whole larger Gram Panchayat kind of meets, and further demands are taken in the Gram Sabha. Maybe one might not get enough demands in the Ward Sabha, so they do a Gram Sabha to get more demand. And then the functionaries do field visits to see whether this makes sense or not. And then, but then again, the CLART is not immediately followed up often. They, uh, because of their timelines and deadlines to finish it, they have to get through the annual action preparation, annual action plan preparation very quickly. And but then there is a requirement to do ground truthing through CLART, and that is why often in some areas they go ahead and on the side, after a broad approval, they check the CLART recommendation and then put it ahead for further approval. And this is so essentially the two key points. One, Gram Sabha is not happening at the very end, which it should. And secondly, CLART usage is not happening in CLART usage is happening quite late, and that kind of points to the fact that it may not in some places be used as a critical decision making point. And this varies across multiple Gram Panchayats, of course, and this is a generalized description of how it happens. So these two issues of Gram Sabha timing and CLART usage timing are issues that we have found. Okay, then going ahead to the remaining couple of hypotheses. So we found that there is good training, there is good adoption. Let's see whether it translates to better choice of water conservation structures in MGNREGA or not. So I have two slides for this. I'll focus on this common land slide, where these are the natural resource management works that are selected and built in common lands or public lands. The top figure is for treatment group, bottom figure is for control group. You have 3 bars horizontally over the past 4 years, so going from top to bottom, and again for this one. And we have kind of divided it for clarity of understanding. We have kind of grouped these works into works which are more focused on kind of aerial treatment, which are in green, which can be trenches, bunds, terraces, plantations. And then we have these blue ones, which are clear recharge structures mostly on drainage lines. Okay, so dams, ponds, soak pits, these are often in for recharge in drainage lines. And so you would see that for the treatment group, the greens are being replaced by the blues over the years in the common lands. And essentially the trenches and bunds and plantations, trenches, bunds and plantations have increased significantly in the treatment group. And in the control group, there is actually no clear pattern which is as clear in the treatment group. So it kind of decreases and increases, but no significant changes in terms of categories. So this is one of the main takeaways that we try to understand why this shift is happening. So there are two kind of background understandings that we need to have for this. One is that there is an increasing agreement across both the scientific community and the civil society that aerial treatment, which includes things like I said, trenches, bunds, and plantations, these might contribute to recharge more than a drainage line treatment. And here I am focusing more on this hydrogeological setup, which in Karnataka is the crystalline granitic hard rock terrains. So a couple of years ago, this paper by Bronze et al. Came out, which essentially was an isotope testing on checking the groundwater isotopes and matching them to where did the groundwater recharge happen from. And they found that the drainage line treatment, which is on the small streams itself, the water from those is not as dominant as the larger catchment, which is a much larger area, of course. So less than 15% was coming from these cascading tanks, and this is for Karnataka, for the very similar context of eastern, southeastern Karnataka. So they found that focusing, if you want to do more groundwater recharge, focus on the aerial treatment. And so that is one part, the science. And then civil society organizations like FES also have been focusing on more better management of common lands. And in Karnataka, a lot of these uplands are common lands, for grazing, etc., or small forests, which are basically good for recharge. So both the scientific and the civil society community are agreeing. This is being reflected in the choice of works. So an increase in aerial treatment is expected and is coming out in the treatment group for the control area. Okay, so the next hypothesis here also, I would like to keep it short, but one of the ideas was that these digital tools will be able to increase the efficiency of the planning process. Here, I would say the signal is not very strong, but there are some indications that things are improving. Where you would see that the so look at the so these are the timelines for different works that we asked all these functionaries, when did you do this part, when did you do this part. This is across multiple gram panchayats that you see as rows here. And you would see, first of all, the greens, which are treatment, they start slightly early. So this hand holding done by the district coordinator of FES, or the trainings that they do, this might lead to some kind of follow up on starting the planning process early. And so that is one. Second, you would see that the length of the planning is also faster in the green ones compared to the blue ones. So that is again some indication of a more efficient or faster process that is taking place, right? So it but we're not because of the lack of the clarity in data, we are not calling this a clear improvement. But there are some indications of work starting early and happening efficiently. This is the final hypothesis about the impact on groundwater levels, right? So we talked about, yes, the knowledge improved, yes, the adoption of CLART improved. There is some indication of improved site selection or work selection. Does that translate to water level improvement over the years? Now, the biggest problem here in putting that into the groundwater context, as a hydrologist, I would say that this is hard rock crystalline aquifer, where the storage is so low and the rainfall is decently high that the aquifers kind of fill up more or less in a normal year. And interannual change on groundwater levels makes more sense to be tested in the alluvial aquifers of northern India rather than the hard rock aquifers of southern India, where interannual changes are not that clear. And because of lack of storage, it would fill up more or less with decent rain every time. So your intervention making a great impact will not clearly be visible in water levels across, just after post monsoon, for example. By post monsoon, things will increase anyway. Whether that post monsoon has water in till late summer, that is a different question, which is where some of the focus should be. But still, given this limitation, still we tried to see whether we can see a signal of increased groundwater recharge. So what we did is essentially we used the water table fluctuation method for water levels before rains and after rains, checked how much it increased, that let's say by this much area, and then this much height and over the year area, and then compared it to the rainfall. So essentially, broadly speaking, uh, the and then comparing it with the rainfall gives us a recharge percentage of sorts. And broadly, we are using the Central Groundwater Board methodology for this. But of course, like I said, in hard rock areas, it is quite difficult to be accurate about these things. But still, overall, on this top left figure, you would see that there is no clear trend over for recharge over the 3 years. In this third year, you see a divergence a little bit because two of these districts are all kind of Raichur, Koppal, Mandya. These are irrigated uh, districts where one would have water in spite of a bad year, while the others plummet because of a bad year. The ones with canal irrigation do not plummet as badly. But overall, there is no clear trend, I would say. This top left is data from the water measurement tool from FES, and the bottom right is the data from the Jaldu dataset, which is starting to be collected by the Ministry of Rural Development. Again, there is a data issue at the center of this, that this top left water measurement tool data is only for intervention districts, and this bottom right one is only for 1 year's pre-post monsoon, and we don't have good data after that yet. So and here also the increase is quite large and no clear differentiation between the control and treatment. So essentially, it's difficult to find that signal, and for whatever data we have, there is no differentiation between the treatment and control data in terms of groundwater levels. Okay, so those were the broad hypotheses. And now finally coming to the learnings and recommendations. So a couple of slides remaining, where these are the key learnings, I would say, that we would take forward. Like I said, broadly, the overall takeaway is that the knowledge improvement of functionaries improved, plant adoption improved, site selection improved to a degree, but no perceptible improvement in community engagement or groundwater levels. So, and this is a general trend across theory of change in many such large scale and deep rooted programs, where the shallower things are easier to change, but the more deeper parts of theory of change are more difficult. But overall, the design for scale model, where you place these strategic district coordinators at certain level and center their work around digital tools, this design for scale model does hold potential, because we saw the signals of improved usage of tools, essentially, right? And then CLART overall seems to be a valuable tool, but it was in certain cases used quite late, and there are some integration issues in terms of how CLART is integrated to the MGNREGA MIS dashboard, at the national level. Those things still need to be sorted out. Thirdly, the systematic online documentation of annual action plans and DPR is still difficult. Like I said at the start, the MGNREGA MIS dashboard focuses on implementation and does it well. Whether stuff is built, whether people have got the money, that part it solves well. The planning part is still very difficult to kind of put one's hand on, that and that the data on it still needs to be improved. We were not able to access annual action plans and DPRs for most of the gram panchayats, which was a major limitation of the study. The next point is that we need to rethink the commons management. Essentially, we got a sense from the community that during community engagement processes, people tend to demand individual works from MGNREGA. That make a shed or a farm bund in or a plantation, horticulture plantation for my farm, and there is a lack of demand for commons management, and the GPANs, the Gram Parisar Abroad Samiti, they are not as active as they could be, and the government could literally create maps for commons areas broadly and help bring out the focus that these are the commons which can be improved through Manrega. So a rethinking of how we can increase the focus on commons management is required. Uh, and then the next one is Gram Sabha is often seems to be held as a demand collection process, that what do you want Manrega to do, and for a blanket approval of all the projects that are possible. And it's often done before all the prioritization and finalization that is done in the Gram Panchayat office, and it should be the other way around. After prioritization, the Gram Sabha should be doing the final agreement on this is the prioritization of works that should be taken up, which is not exactly happening in the way it's supposed to. And then essentially in these hard rock areas, the overall focus, if you have it on groundwater, it is much more important to get more granular water level data because of the heterogeneity in the hard rock aquifer system. So more spatial and temporal heterogeneity of data is required to understand whether these programs are actually making a dent or not. So these are the broad learnings. We do have a few more recommendations. I'm just going to pause for a couple of seconds over this, so if you want to read them, you can do that. But I think most of the critical ones I've covered already in the key learnings, so I won't go into the details. So yeah, and going forward, we are planning to engage more closely with the stakeholders, including FES, which is working with other similar state governments across the country. States like Meghalaya, Jharkhand, and other states that are coming up in Assam, etc., where they are planning to use CLART and improvement of Manrega planning in other states. So I hope that this broad understanding of improvement in Manrega planning is able to put out more understanding in the public domain about what are the processes in which the public money is being spent on Manrega, and trying to slowly improve the site selection and overall planning in Manrega. Thank you.